Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening on a webinar we have called A Matter of Minhagim. Last night, of course, was Zayin Adar, or yesterday was Zayin Adar. Many Chevra's Kadisha convened on Zayin Adar, some during the day, some in the evening after, some actually, I believe, even the first night of Zayin Adar. Some Chevra's fast and have a Suda afterwards. There are many minhagim, but again, this is one of the minhagim, one of the traditions that are followed by Chevra's Kadisha across the world for many years. There are Chevras that choose other days. It does not have to necessarily be Zayin Adar, and whatever the minhag of that Chevra is what prevails. And that is really, I think, the key. If there's one common point that needs to be made, it is that while minhagim are extremely important and that every Chevra Kadisha needs to follow its minhagim, the fact is that there are different minhagim in different Chevra's Kadisha. And I'll read to you from the Zichron Meir, written by Rav Aaron Levine from Toronto, Zichron Livracha, who wrote this sefer in memory of his son Meir, which is why it's called Zichron Meir, who was nifter at a very young age. And it's a compilation of the halachos and the minhagim of Chevra Kadisha. It's widely accepted, and it's an excellent source for all questions that come up regarding Chevra Kadisha practice until the end of the burial. Does not discuss Hilchos Avelos at great length. And he talks about the Chevra Kadisha, and particularly the Tahara. And I'm quoting, this is on page 291. It says, Kol Chevra v'Chevra, every Chevra Kadisha, Tenaheg, Lefi Minhagei Hamogam, should conduct themselves and follow the traditions of their place. And that is really what has been the commonly accepted rule for Chevra's Kadisha across the world for hundreds of years. And he brings in the footnotes, and I'll quote because as someone who was able to see so many different Sfarim, and he chose that which he felt was the most common and most important psak. And he quotes from Sefer, well-known Sefer Beis Lechem Yehuda, where he says, "Ein leChevra Kadisha l'shanos minhagam." Chevra's Kadisha should not change their minhagim, mishum bizayon shel shar meisim hakodmim, because that would be somehow disrespectful to the people before them, the people who were being treated with a certain type of minhag, and now you're going to change that minhag. That somehow changes what was done, and so is something that detracts from the kavod that they had. And he goes through to tell a story. This is the Beis Lechem Yehuda, of a town where there was, unfortunately, many young people dying, and they finally asked the Rav, and he told them that what was done recently in the Chevra Kadisha, and they said they changed the board that they were using for the Chevra Kadisha for the Tahara was changed in some way. And he said, go back to the way it was done. And when that happened, the mageh for the number of people who died disappeared. They stopped dying, and everyone was well. And of course, is an extreme case. But the fact is that this has always been something that has been incorporated into the Minhagei Chevra Kadisha itself. The tradition of the Chevra Kadisha was that you are very careful to maintain its minhagim. I would say that the most accepted set of guidelines and procedures that were followed in the United States in the last, certainly up until recently, for many years, from the 70s, certainly till at least 10 years ago, was the guidelines and procedures that were put together by the Chevra Kadisha in Chicago called the Jewish Sacred Society of Chicago. And it was put together by a few different people. It was reviewed by a few different people. There was the Weizen Rav, who was a Rav in Chicago. He had a yeshiva in Chicago. He was a Hasidic Rav, a Hungarian Rav. And then there was Rav Regensburg, who was a Rosh Yeshiva. And he was a Litvish Rav, a Rav that came from the yeshiva community, the yeshiva world. And last but not least, Yibadul Chaim Tovim, he should live and be well for many years, Rabbi Peretz Steinberg of the Young Israel of Queens Valley, who had at that time put together procedures based on his Kabbalah, the things that he had learned from Rav Moshe, who was his Rebbe, Rav Moshe Feinstein. And the three of them arrived at this set of Minhagim. And I think what was particularly what I recognized as the reason they chose these three people, I believe, and I believe I discussed it with Rabbi Steinberg years ago as well, is the fact that they came from three different areas of Europe and three different areas. Steinberg, of course, was an American, but also the Hasidic world, the Litvish world, and they arrived at a group of Minhagim they could all agree to as being kind of the generic set of Minhagim. And that became their set of procedures, and many Chevra Kadisha around the country followed those procedures. In the introduction to this little pamphlet, Rav Meisels writes that people should be careful. He says, my request is laid out before the heads of Chevra Kadisha. Shelo l'shanos ziz kolshehu. You should not change the slightest thing. Mikol ha'alochos v'minhagim shemucha lefneichem, from all the laws and the minhagim that are prepared before you, that are what you have received as your tradition. And he goes on to, this is the footnote in the Zichur Meir, goes on to explain something which I quoted last night in my presentation at the Zayin Adar that we had in Queens. And so the Gemara in Sanhedrin Memvav Amid Aleph, where the Gemara discusses a question that was put by a guy, by Shavur Malka, who put a question to Rav Acha. Where do we know in the Torah that we're supposed to bury somebody? Where is the halacha in the Torah that we're supposed to bury? The Gemara says Rav Acha was quiet. Rav Acha didn't answer him. And the reason the Mefarshim explained was because the main pasuk that we learned, the requirement of burial, is from a pasuk Hikavar Tikbarenu, and we learned it out from the fact that it's a double lashon, so it's from an extra word in the Torah. And Rav Acha felt that a guy would not understand that, and therefore he didn't answer him. So the Gemara goes on to say, why didn't he tell him that very simply? You see that Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov were all buried. All the tzaddikim in the Torah, the patriarchs, the matriarchs, Rachel, they were all buried. So why don't we learn from there the mitzvah of Kura? And the Gemara answers, no, it's no proof from there. Maybe that was the custom of the time. That was the minhag at that time. And so that's what was done. But not that it's a requirement. And if the minhag changes, then one does not have to be buried. Then the Gemara goes on to say, well, what about the fact that Hashem himself on Zayin Adar buried Moshe Rabbeinu on the mountain? Hashem did it. And obviously that tells us that that's the appropriate thing to do. So the Gemara answers, no. Maybe the Ribono Shel Olam did it, shelo l'shani minhaga, the same thing, not to change the minhag. The minhag was that we bury. That was what was done to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and so we did it by Moshe also, not because it was necessarily the right thing or the only thing. You can't learn from there. From this Gemara, many poskim learn out that you see the importance of not changing minhagim specifically in the area of Chevra Kadisha. And so this is something that I think is a source perhaps for this concept, but it's brought down in many places, in many Sfarim, the importance of being faithful to the Minhagim. I can tell you that, one of the most common questions that I'm asked when I lecture and have lectured is always this question of what is minhag and what is din, what is law and what is custom, what is tradition. And I always answer that we know in halacha, a minhag has the power of a din, but particularly in the area of Chevra Kadisha, it's important. And if anyone has been to my lectures, you've probably heard the story. But for those who haven't, I'll just use it as an example of something that personally happened. And I felt this sense of responsibility to remain true to the Minhagim. There was a woman in my Chevra Kadisha whom I knew very well. She was a woman in my Chevra, she was a nurse. She had actually trained my wife and I in Lamaz when we were expecting our first child. And she was ill. She got very sick. Was terminally ill at that point. She was a nurse, a head nurse in one of the biggest hospitals in New York, and they gave her a little suite where she stayed until her passing. And I went to see her in the hospital, and we discussed many things, but in the process of our discussion, she asked me for a favor. She said, Rabbi Zohn, I don't know how you're going to feel about this, but there's something that bothers me, and I need to discuss it with you, and you may not understand it, but it's very important to me. So when they do my tahara, and we had discussed many aspects of who would be there and other things, and she said, when they do my tahara, I would be very uncomfortable if they were to clean my nails. She says, my nails will probably be clean, but if they're not, I really would appreciate if they just leave them as they are. It'll be okay with me. I just find that demeaning. I can't even explain it. And so that was just one of the things. I was taking notes of many things that she had asked. And as I was leaving, I said to her, I'm going to try my very best to do whatever it is that you've asked, but I'm going to ask you to think about one thing. I mentioned this particular point, and I said, I am just not comfortable asking the members of my Chevra Kadisha to do something in the Tahara process by you that is something that we do not do for anyone else, or that we do for everyone else that we're not going to do for you. If you could think about it, I would be more comfortable. And I let it go at that. She called me a couple of days later, said, Rabbi, I've given the thought, I'm fine with it. Let them do whatever they have to do. It's not that, cleaning nails, not cleaning nails, they be clean. What do we have to clean it for? The minhag is that we clean nails. There was a minhag in many Chevras Kadisha to cut nails. The minhag in our Chevras, we don't cut nails. Most Chevras today, at least in the United States, don't cut nails. But the point is that whatever the minhag is, that needs to be followed. There are so many minhagim that are minhagim. There's much of the tahara process, almost the entire process is minhag. The only halachas that are certainly the halachas in the Torah are the halachas of kvura. You have to be buried. Everyone agrees that you have to be buried, in-ground burial, and that it has to be done as immediately as possible, particularly in Eretz Yisrael. But in general, lo solin, we don't leave a body for any length of time. We try to bury them as quickly as we possibly can, unless it's a reason that we find that the covered will be greater, there'll be greater respect if we wait for them. Many tzaddikim, they waited till a large enough crowd could gather so that people would be impressed, people would be moved by the eulogy and so on. But many things are minhag. The fact that we use earth from Eretz Yisrael, where we place the earth from Eretz Yisrael. Some Chevras Kadisha use egg and vinegar, a mixture of egg white and vinegar. Some use an entire egg, some use wine. Where to place it, some place it by the head, some place it, sprinkle it over the body. These are all minhagim. Gapelach, people have little sticks that they put in the hands of a person. Whether they close the hands over it, they leave it open, they just put it next to it. These are all differences. Sheblach, broken pottery over the eyes and the mouth. To illustrate this, and I told this story again last night. It's a story that just happened with me, where a Chevra Kadisha that I was lecturing to someone in the Chevra Kadisha brought to my attention the process of preparing for the lecture. And he said, we've been discussing this minhag of egg and vinegar. It seems it's a very recent minhag. And the reason for the minhag was because at one time in our very difficult history of going through Golus and of being faced with anti-Semitism in so many different forms, there was a problem where sometimes when they would be moving a person who was deceased in a casket, they would be taking him from one city to another. They would come through a customs house where they would have to stop and be checked for contraband that they may have been carrying. And so they would take the casket into the customs house, and an hour later they would give it back and say, it's okay, you can go on. But in that process, they would have removed the Jewish person and replaced them with a non-Jew, and then that non-Jew would be, there'd be a hue and cry that some Christian child or Christian person was missing. They would check the freshly dug graves in the cemetery, and sure, they would find this non-Jew in this casket, which had been left in the customs house. And so a pogrom would take place. This was the part of the libels that were going on during a very long period of our very, very difficult history. And so the Chevra's Kadisha, in order to avoid this potential, the Chevra's Kadisha began a custom where they would place egg and vinegar with the person as an identification of the bodies. When the body came out of the customs house, they would not have to unwrap the body, but they would be able to, the sense of smell, which vinegar or wine has, very strong sense of smell, as well as through eggs, which are sticky. This is my own interpretation. I've heard this from a number of people. I've discussed it, but the idea was these articles, eggs and wine and vinegar, have their place in Avelus. They're mentioned they're used in different parts of Avelus, and therefore it was a way of identifying a Jew in a way which they could do it without having to unwrap the entire body. And so this remained the custom in this area of Europe up until the Holocaust, until all of these Chevra's Kadisha came to the United States, and we adopted these Minhagim as well. There were other places in Europe that didn't have it, and certainly the Sephardic communities never had it. And so this person said to me that this came up in discussion, and since today we don't really have these issues, they were considering to go back to what the Rambam writes, which is that they would put besubim, some very good smelling herbs, on the body so that the body would smell better, or maybe using some rose water or something like that. And I thought about it between the time this came up and the time of my lecture, and I got up and I opened my lecture, as I always do with Minhagim, and I said the following, and I'm not sure, but I said to them, this is how I see it. I said, why is it that when these blood libels stopped, which was quite a while back, it's 100 years, whatever it was, why did they continue these minhagim after that was no longer applicable? And I think the reason is because there is a halacha, that is brought, it's actually brought in Shulchan Aruch, that if a person dies by violent death, just as someone dies by a terrorist act or by an act of anti-Semitism, particularly if it's done through a non-Jew, that we don't do a tahara. We basically leave the person as is, we spread out the tachrichim, and we bury them as they are. Now that halacha applies even today. One of the reasons we may not know this halacha that well is because today, when someone dies in that kind of a situation, by the time the Chevra Kadisha gets it, it's usually been autopsied and all the clothing have been removed, and what you're looking at is not the same scene that happened at the time of the death. But if you would have the person as they died, with the clothing, with the whatever it is that's there, we would leave them exactly as they are. And in Eretz Yisrael today, that is the custom of the Chevra Kadisha. Someone who dies in a terrorist act, they leave them as is and they bury them that way. And what is the reason? The reason is because this will somehow arouse within Shamayim, within the heavenly court, a sense of Rahmanis, of compassion for the Jewish people who are going through this terrible galus, this terrible exile until this very day. So I said to the people of this year, I said, I believe the reason why the Rabbanim and the Chevra Kadisha continued the minhag until now was because that identification of the Jew was meant to stay on, to remind us, to arouse that Rahmanis, that while maybe the blood libels are no longer exactly as they are, but there is anti-Semitism throughout the world, just as there certainly was before the Holocaust and certainly after the Holocaust. And I said, now that we're coming back, where anti-Semitism is becoming so much more rampant, and there's so much terrorism, and so many people are dying because they are Jewish. Now is the time to change this minhag. If anything, now is the time to incorporate such minhagim, so that we would know, and certainly to stick to such minhagim, so that we would be ma'orer rachamim in Shemayim. And so I just feel that we need to recognize that every minhag that is an authentic minhag, and I say that for a reason, every minhag that has a Kabbalah that has been given over from generation to generation has sources that are extremely meaningful. Some we understand, some we may not understand, some may be a Kabbalistic, but they have sources that are of extreme importance. And so it is important to maintain the minhagim of our Chevra Kadisha. That does not mean that there are no mistakes. I have often again told this story, you may have heard it, but I was lecturing in Chevra Kadisha early on, where there was a question about what the face cover by the woman was. I said, this is a face cover. It's a piece of cloth that covers the face with a band around it. And the people of the Chevra Kadisha looked at me like I was crazy. They all raised their hand. They say, Rabbi, that's an apron. And I said to them, there are Chevra Kadisha that have an apron as part of the traditional set of tachrichim they use, but everyone uses a face cover. And so there was someone in the Chevra Kadisha at one point which saw this and remembered an apron, but didn't know it was a face cover, and therefore it became an apron. But the fact is that the most basic part of the tachrichim is the face cover. The apron is optional. So we agreed for the future that they would order the tachrichim with a face cover and an apron. So they maintained the apron, but they also use the face cover. But that is a mistake. There are Chevra Kadisha that will use the pillow that is meant as a pillow as a place to put the blood that they may find during a tahara, as a little bag full of blood to put at the foot of the urn. That's not what the pillow is. It's meant to be filled and placed under the head of the person. Whether we fill it with straw, some Chevras fill it with earth, but it's meant to be filled and used as a pillow. So there are times where mistakes creep into the minhagim of a Chevra Kadisha. But as a general rule, every minhag of a Chevra Kadisha needs to be followed. And in today's world, I have found over the last few years that there are more and more questions that arise about the minhagim of Chevra Kadisha for many reasons. There is mobility that we more today than we've ever had, where people from one community are moving to another location and join another Chevra Kadisha. There's videos that are out there. There's all kinds of things. There are a lecture such as this, where people can watch and they hear things, and some people question. I know in my Chevra, this is what we do. And then it becomes a debate. And maybe this seems a little nicer, or this seems a little better, and it becomes a discussion. And then it becomes adopted, or there becomes sometimes this, sometimes that. So there are a lot of influences. People today have access to social media. There's a lot out there on social media. There are Chevra Kadisha that will do a tahara even if there's no tachrichim. There's influences from the non-Orthodox community. There are influences from many different sources. And so perhaps more today than ever, it is important for Chevra's Kadisha to review their Minhagim, to know what those Minhagim are. If they're following a certain set of standards and practices, that's what they should follow. Let them make a decision if they have a question. Make the decision with your Rav or with the elders of the Chevra Kadisha who were in the Chevra, may no longer be in the Chevra. Discuss it with the posek. It is worth having. Every Chevra Kadisha should have a clear and defined set of minhagim. And Zayin Adar is a time where traditionally Chevra's Kadishas reviewed those minhagim. And so therefore I felt that tonight's shir would be really appropriate to address minhagim. And my goal is not to establish a set of minhagim for the country or for the world, but to know that we need to know what the minhagim are. There are questions out there, and many of the questions that came in are beyond minhagim, although almost everyone touches on it in one way or another. But I'll be happy to take questions. We'll hopefully go through the questions that we had. We'll try to address them as quickly as we can, and then hopefully we'll be able to take some more questions. But the importance of minhagim is the goal to appreciate, to understand that particularly in this area of Chevra Kadisha, of kavod hames, of giving kavod to the person who died, there is a very powerful emphasis to maintain the minhagim that we have, those minhagim that we know are authentic, and to establish minhagim. The last thing that we need to do ever is to have a discussion or an argument within the tahara room. That is something that is certainly not kavod hames, and is a terrible bizoyin hames. But also, as we saw changing minhagim, Ribono Shalom himself buried Moshe Rabbeinu, or would have buried Moshe Rabbeinu, even if it was maybe not the most appropriate thing, because that is the minhag. That's what we do. He would not have changed. That's what the Gemara says. You couldn't prove it from there. That's a fascinating, powerful insight into what the power of a minhag in the area of Chevra Kadisha is. And with that, I will move on to some of the questions. And the first question is actually a question that we could spend the rest of the hour on, but it's a question someone asked to review. What are the minhagim regarding dam, regarding blood? What blood needs to be saved? What blood doesn't need to be saved? And again, those of you who are familiar with my shir, I always spend a little time on this. There are three categories of blood. The most lenient category is blood that flows prior to death, and does really not have any contribution to the death. It's no way related to the death, and that blood really does not need to be saved. However, before we go on, I will say that those Chevra's Kadisha that do save blood will generally save any blood that they find in the tahara process. If it's blood, and it's not mixed with dirt, and it's on a bandage or a Band-Aid that probably was there from before death, or maybe it's a little dried now and it looks like it was there from before death, or it's on a sheet which doesn't correspond to any sore or any puncture, and you have to assume it probably was there from before the person died. If it's blood, we save it. But that is blood before death technically does not require kfura. Blood that flows at the time of death and contributes to the death, that is most common in an accident, in a traumatic situation. Someone is killed, someone that falls, a gunshot wound, whatever it may be. That blood is dam that we call dam nefesh, blood through which the nefesh, the neshama, may have left the person. We know ki hadam hu nefesh, the life force is carried by the blood, and therefore that we know must always be buried under all circumstances, which is why we see sidewalks being broken up and all kinds of heroic measures taken to make sure that all blood is buried with a person. I've told many times my first experience with this type of work with Chevra Kadisha was as a young child. There was a man in my neighborhood in Williamsburg who was stabbed by a tenant of his, and he died right next to the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. And I remember us gathering as children to see the hole where the Chevra Kadisha dug up the earth to bury in his kever because the earth was saturated with his blood. That is dam nefesh. That needs to be saved, even though it's in dirt, but you take it along and you bury it with the person. And that is the most stringent type of blood. It doesn't have to be an accident, doesn't have to be a homicide. If someone had a varicose vein that opened and they bled to death because they couldn't stop the bleeding, that dam is dam nefesh. That blood needs to be saved, and it's saved under all circumstances. There is the most common type of blood, which is dam, blood la'achar misa, that flows after death. And that blood is a difference of opinion among poskim. And here there are different minhagim. There are Chevra's Kadisha that are not so careful with this type of blood. And even there, those who are not, if it is a revius of blood, if it's more than a couple of ounces of blood, then even those poskim will agree that you should bury that blood. But if it's not, there are differences. The minhag in most communities in the United States, in the Hasidic communities, and many other communities, certainly the Chicago booklet and others, is we save blood that is la'achar misa, to the point that the psak that I have clearly from Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky and from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein Zichronim Livracha is that if it means that we're not going to be able to pour water at a tahara, the only way we're going to be able to pour water is by losing blood after death, then we don't do the tahara. We wash the body and save the blood. We'll dress the body. But if pouring Tisha Kabbalah is going to wash away blood, or is in danger of washing away blood, then we don't do it. That is according to those poskim who hold that blood after death must be saved. That blood is gathered and it is placed at the foot of the aron and it is buried with the person. There is one difference between blood that flows at the time of death, which is dam nefesh, and must be saved according to everyone. In fact, in many poskim it says you don't even do anything, just leave it where it is and just bury the person that is, don't even dress them. But we generally do try to clean the person since we save all the blood, and we dress them, and we, if it's not a case of someone who died in a violent death, then we do, as I said, we save all the blood, we clean it, even in the case of dam nefesh, and we dress the body, but we make sure that every drop of blood is saved. But the difference between that blood and blood that flows after death, even if we save it, is one difference. And that is, if it's dam nefesh, we will save it under all circumstances, even if it's mixed with dirt, and if we have to wrap it up. We wrap it up, we put it at the foot of the aron. Where it's blood that flows after death, if it's mixed with things that are dirty, with body waste, or it's mixed with it's putrid, or it's from a bed sore, or it's mucus that has some blood in it, all of that we discard. There we are maskim, we agree with the poskim and say you don't have to save it since it's in a state of bizoyon, it's not something that's respectful, has a bad odor, and it's mixed in any case, then we will discard it if it's blood after death, but not by dam nefesh. That is the answer to that question, and that is according to the Minhagim that follow the rule to save blood after death. If the minhag is not to save blood after death, then we can, if it's washed away, it's not a problem. But according to everyone, by the way, we would still make every effort to stop any bleeding to continue and to make sure that the tachrichim remain clean. All of that still applies according to all minhagim. Now, there was a question that came in from out of the country, actually. Came in from, I believe this is from South Africa, regarding are there any svarim that deal with exhumation, with pinu yatzamas, how to exhume a body? And while this is not the real focus of this shir, There are svarim. I mean, there are halachas in Shulchan Aruch about Piniyat Tzamas. The Zichron Meir does have a chapter on it, which I recommend you could use. I am not familiar with a sefer. Actually, I think there is a sefer that was put out in Eretz Yisrael, but I'm not familiar with anything, certainly not in English, that deals with Piniyat Tzamas, specifically with exhumation. But there are specific laws that have to be followed, and it has to be done very carefully. You never do a Piniyat Tzamas without the agreement of Rabbanim. It's something we are not looking to do, and it has a lot of rules that need to be followed as to when it is done, how it is done, when it is permitted to be done. But as far as I know, a good source is the Zichron Meir. I'm not familiar with a sefer that has specifically a focus of how you are mefana atzamos. I will say this. I will say that you always must have someone who is knowledgeable, who has shimush, who has experience in how to do this. Don't rely on a funeral director or a cemetery operator who says they know how to do it. They may know how to do it, but they almost definitely do not know how to do it in accordance with halacha, in accordance with Minhagim Yisrael. So you have to make sure that someone from a Chevra Kadisha who has experience in Piniyat Tzamas and Likut Tzamas, who knows what needs to be done. Okay, there are some questions that came in that ask for certain Minhagim to be explained. One of them is doing a tahara on a parent. Is it mutter? The minhag that is brought, it's brought in many svarim, is just as we don't go to a mikveh with a parent, and this is true for women and men, that we do not have a child in the tahara room during a tahara as a tahara is being done. Okay, that is the generally accepted minhag of almost all chevras. Some chevras will allow children to come in at the end, after the person is in the aron, or maybe right before, to either tie a bendel, to tie something, or in the Bukharian community, they put on the earth on the eyes and the shablach, whatever the minhag is. But for the tahara itself, a child is not permitted to be there. That is the generally accepted minhag. And this might even be a child who cared for this parent for the last who knows how many years and bathed them and took care of them. But now that they've passed on and it's time of the Chevra Kadisha to take care of them, children are not part of that process. Okay, if it can be accommodated in the way in which we discussed it, that is something that can be done. I would also say just this evening, maybe I shouldn't say this afternoon, I dealt with a case where someone wanted to be in a tahara room of a close family friend, and the Chevra Kadisha refused. They do not permit anyone into the tahara. That is the minhag of their Chevra Kadisha, who is not a member of the Chevra, and there could be good reasons for that as well. I would just say that whatever the minhag of the Chevra is, that's something that is really in the purview of every Chevra Kadisha to make the decision what they want to do. In our Chevra Kadisha, we do not permit any family members, even if they are involved in our own Chevra Kadisha. We do not permit family members, even if it's not parents, simply because we feel that a family member in a tahara room will place a certain level of stress on the people doing the tahara, and they may make decisions that they would not otherwise make because they're uncomfortable in the presence of that person. That's not a halacha, that's a practical thing. But our Chevra Kadisha has that practice. We do not allow others into a tahara room other than members of the Chevra Kadisha, certainly not family members. If someone from the outside wants to join our Chevra, if they are a member of a Chevra, we generally do permit them as an extra person with an understanding that no questions will be asked. But the minhag of every Chevra prevails. So for a parent, to answer that question, it is the minhag in most Chevras Kadisha, and I think it's an appropriate minhag that a child should not be present at the tahara of a parent until that parent is at least fully dressed or in the aron. Okay, that is at the discretion of the Chevra Kadisha. Okay, but they should not be allowed in. Others, every Chevra Kadisha can make their own decision. I think we discussed the next part, why Avelus is one of the oldest Minhagim that Klal Yisrael holds. I think we discussed it with the Minhagim that the Gemara in Sanhedrin, I think, is the source for that we see the importance of Minhagim in the area of Kvura and Avelus. Question about pregnant women doing the Tahara. I can tell you that I was the head of a Chevra Kadisha out of town for 1 year in New Haven, Connecticut. And at that time, there was a Tahara, and many of the people in the Chevra Kadisha, among the women, were pregnant. And we didn't have enough people. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein told me that if a woman is comfortable and she has done Tahara and she feels that she would have no problem, then it's mutter to do a Tahara if you're pregnant. There's a shel for Kohen's wife could do a Tahara. You can. Kohanim's wives generally are not, so will go to a place where there's a possibility of Tumas HaMeis, they will go. And the fact is that it's mutter for a woman who is pregnant to go to a Tahara if she is sure that she will be comfortable. His only concern was her physical or emotional response, but not because there is something about a Tahara that a woman who is pregnant cannot do. But if someone has never done a Tahara and doesn't know what to expect, I would not send them in a Tahara based on that concern that there could be a physical reaction that would be detrimental. Another question that was asked about delicate skin. When do we use tegaderm? When might we wrap that part with blue pads or something like that? So obviously, tegaderm is used in a small area, in a place where just putting something on, like some tape or something like that, would not work. A tegaderm is fine. I think if you have a choice of tegaderm on a small, sometimes there are places on the hand where there is a puncture and it's weeping because the person was full of fluids and it might just come in from that one spot. I think it's even better to put a little small piece of tegaderm on the smallest size that you have, rather than put on a bandage or something else. Tegaderm is fine. It's an excellent way of covering into the tachrich. It will not be dirty. Of course, you would put it on after the body's had a tahara, and you put on the tachrich, and now you are ready to bury the person. At that point, you're ready to put on the tachrich. That's when you would do it. If it's a larger area, a big bed sore, a few bed sores, and the only way you don't have big pieces, big tegaderm, or even if you do, you're not sure you'll be able to hold, then of course you would put on a blue pin. It depends on the situation. If tegaderm can be used effectively, I think it's better. It's more expensive, but if you have it and it's available, I think tegaderm is better. But there may be places where a blue pin is just the more logical and practical thing to use. But there's nothing wrong with using tegaderm instead of tape or something else. Again, to keep the tachrich from being dirty once you are ready to dress the body. There's someone who asked a question about not facing the body.
Rabbi Zohn?
Yes.
Rabbi Zohn, I'm sorry. Just before we move on, there was a follow-up question on the Q&A here with this. Is there any situation that you would remove skin?
Remove skin?
Meaning skin that is, skin that is weak, falling off, hanging skin like that. Would you just leave it in place? And
I mean, if the skin, let's put it this way. There have been times where there's been skin that's hanging, and there's no question that if we put that person in a mikveh, or even if we're going to pour Tisha Kabin, that it will get lost. Okay, in a case like that, I would, and chances are in the process of the tachrich being put on or anything else, it's going to be removed in any case. I would probably just remove it if that's going to make the difference. But if it's all over the body, I would certainly not do it. If it's in one specific spot, I remember asking a shel once about blisters that are, sometimes there are very full blisters, and we know that it's going to burst when you put it on. It's going to dirty the tachrichim. The limit to what you can do. I asked the shah, is it mutter to puncture that blister so you could dress the person appropriately? And the answer was yes. Just to puncture it, let it drain. But I don't know that I would remove skin unless it was that kind of a situation where it's hanging and it's almost off, And that's going to make a difference in being able to properly dress it or properly do a tahara. I think I would probably do it in that kind of a situation. But I'm afraid of opening a Pandora's box. As a general rule, we do not tear off skin in any which way. Okay, that's the general rule. A rosh in a tahara room, if something is mamish hanging, and you're sitting there wondering for 10 minutes what you're going to do, and a minute later it's going to come off anyway, probably I would remove it and save it. Okay, that's helpful.
Excellent.
Okay, now, there was a question about, is there any reason to stay away a certain distance from the body when saying tefillos, particularly the tefillah of Hamol, and that the face must be covered? There are many Chevra Kadisha that always cover the face. But if they don't cover the face, I don't know that Hamol should be said only if the face is covered or at any great distance. Of course, there are issues when there is dirt present, if there's urine present on the table or body waste, you can't say tefillos. But if everything being equal, I don't know that there is such a thing. I could hear such a concept, and maybe it's brought in a sefer somewhere. I can't say that I've never, it doesn't make sense, chas v'shalom. It could be, since we are talking about the averis that the person did, chamol, al so-and-so, and all this chatoim and avodas, maybe we should stand a little further away. There's also an Indian that a person's sins can be seen on their face, which is one of the reasons we cover the face. So maybe when we say this particular tefillah, I don't know. There's all conjecture. I've never heard of such a thing. I don't know that Chevras that do it. If anyone in the audience is familiar with it and has an understanding, please feel free to reach out to me and let me know. I'd be very happy to learn about this. And if there's a sefer, please refer me to it. Okay, if facial orifices need to be stuffed with cotton, should they be removed once the nifter is lying in the aron? The answer is, if removing it is not going to allow for further purging, then absolutely. I would be very careful if you're removing something from the mouth or the nose, that you should be make sure that the head is appropriately raised, so that there's less, when you raise the head properly, it closes the airway, does not allow fluids to come up, and also that the head is positioned well on the pillow, that the pillow is positioned well so that it's not going to fall to the side and it won't purge. But all that being in place and you feel confident, of course you should remove it. If it has blood on it, you should put it away with the blood. If it's dirt, throw it away. But yes, absolutely, especially one of the things we were doing in COVID. I don't think we do it anymore, but if someone is still, there's one practice you may want to keep for a patient that is COVID positive, to pack the mouth. I would remove that at the end of the tahara and throw it away. But yes, the answer is, if the body is positioned in a way that you are confident that it's not going to continue to purge, then yes, I would remove it from the mouth or the nose. If you are not confident, then maybe I would push it in a little further so that it's not visible, should a family have to identify, but then you probably should leave it in. When proper cleaning of Tisha Kabin cannot be done due to large openings or deterioration of the body, what tefillos should be said and what should be omitted? Whatever tefillos should be said are the tefillos that apply. If you're not doing a tahara, then you would not say Omer Rabbi Akiva or Sosa Sis. I'm sorry, you wouldn't say Omer Rabbi Akiva, because that's the tefillah that is said for the tahara. You wouldn't say Torahu, because it's not, there is no tahara. But you would say the tefillahs for the rechitza. If there's not going to be a rechitza because the person is in terrible condition, they were decomposed, then you wouldn't say the tefillahs for the rechitza. But if you're going to lay out the tachwichim, I would say the tefillah for the tachwichim. So those are that is whatever you are doing, you say the tefillahs for. Whatever you're not doing is what you don't say. Now here's a bunch of questions about a nafel, which is a stillbirth. And it seems here we're talking about a full-term stillbirth. There are different minhagim regarding this. Some people don't do anything but wrap it in a sheet to begin with. everyone should give it a name that is brought down, whether you give it at the time that you put it in the aron, that you wrap it, or the time that you bury it at the kever. Either way is fine. There should be a bris. If it's a male that is able to have a bris, if it's large enough to be able to have a bris, then it should be done. It does not have to be done by a mohel. If there's someone on the Chevra who's seen it done and knows how to do it, they can do it. There's no tearing the or hapriya because that's impossible. It's just too difficult. But the fact is that those are the things that should be done, and everyone does. It's important. Shulchan Aruch, we give it a name, and we do a bris on a nafel, the mezaka a nafel with bris milah. However, the rest of it depends on minhagim. For those Chevra's Kadisha that do a tahara, then they do. So there were a couple of questions. If there is some fluid that is on the body that is like sticky, it has like the amniotic fluid that's on the body. If it can be cleaned without tearing skin, for example, with some sudsy water that takes it off, it could be done. If not, I would leave it and not do it. As far as what to use for the mikveh, okay, if you want to use a mikveh, you still need a regular mikveh. There was a question here about using a sink as a mikveh. You can't use a sink as a mikveh because a sink is not a mikveh. So it's the idea is either you do tisha kabin, you pour it slowly, or you place it in a regular mikveh that has 40 saw, if that's what you have, but it has to be a mikveh if you're going to do it. Not every chevra does a tahara. If you don't do a tahara, if that's the meaning not to do a tahara, you don't do a tahara. Okay, but if you do it, you have to do it in a mikveh that has tisha kabin, or that has mem saw, that has the proper amount of water, or to use tisha kabin, even if it has to be done slowly. Then that's what you do without a pause. Now, what is the best order in terms of doing a tahara? What is preferable? These are the questions for the process. Mikveh, tisha kabin, standing for tisha kabin, or tisha kabin on boards, lying down. And the answer is what your Chevra Kadisha does is best. There are Chevra's Kadisha that will not do a tahara even if there is a mikveh. In the Yeki community, they will not do a tahara even if there is a mikveh, and there are great poskim who paskin that. Okay, Rav Moshe Feinstein writes that if they're going to charge a little extra for a mikveh, then you shouldn't use a mikveh. As a psak, when the Parkside in Queens opened up their building and they put in a mikveh, they charged $100 more for the use of the mikveh. He said you shouldn't use the mikveh, do tisha kabin, don't raise the price of funerals. But the idea is that a mikveh is for anyone who does not feel that they are, any Chevra Kadisha does not feel that they must follow Tisha Kabin, then it is preferable to move to mikveh, because mikveh has milas that Tisha Kabin does not. And Rav Moshe seemed to feel that it is an upgrade, but not to pay more money. The Iker Tahara was established from the time of Hillel HaZaken to be Tisha Kabin, not mikveh. And that is always what has been used. The mikveh came from communities where people went to the mikveh every single day. And for those people, it is probably very important to have a mikveh in the tahara process. For them, mikveh is more of an inyan. Great tzaddikim, it is brought to, we should use a mikveh, we should take them to the mikveh. What was done in many communities was they did a tahara with tisha kabin, and then they would take the person to the mikveh. And there are chevras today that actually do both. They do tisha kabin and a mikveh. But again, that's mainly for great tzaddikim who probably were careful to go to the mikveh themselves. And for those people that live in communities in the Hasidic world where they use mikvahs every day, they go to the mikveh, then they should also have a mikveh for them. I would say certainly if it's possible, a mikveh is l'chatchila is the best thing. Once you're using tisha kabin, then there are different options. Standing up is by far the best option. The Chicago Chevra Kadisha, which I mentioned before, the Jewish Sacred Society actually recommends standing up. That is by far the best. If it can be done, in our Chevra Kadisha, we try to do it for the men, not for the women. It's not the place to go through that whole process right now, but that is preferable. If not, then on boards, the body should be as angled as possible. There are different ways of doing it, either by walking the water down without a pause, or by shooting the water like in a shower going over the head. These are different ways, but again, they are, that is the order, I would say. The order is, if you're in a place where they use mikvos and you come from that community, mikvah is certainly best, Tisha Kabin is secondary, and then standing up Tisha Kabin is better than lying flat. And which of the two ways, whether it's walking down or shooting it down, for many poskim that I've spoken to, they feel shooting the water is better than walking the water. Many poskim had strong questions on the process of walking water down, but it's a minhag Yisrael that's been followed for centuries by chashuv communities. So chas v'shalom to say that it's inappropriate, but that is the order. I hope it's been clear to understand exactly what the order is. Okay, so it's mikveh in those communities that use it, and it can still be used in places where people don't go to the mikveh every day, especially if the choice is Tisha Kabin lying flat. But then Tisha Kabin is certainly fine. Standing up is better than lying flat. Okay, now, if you can't pour tahara water on the head, do you do a tahara? I believe the answer to that is no. A tahara was meant to be rosho verubo. You have to pour the water over most of the head, over the head and most of the body. If the feet won't get wet, it's fine. But if the head doesn't get wet, then it's not Tisha Kabin. In fact, Tisha Kabin was meant to be a shower, derech harosh, which is why we stand the body up. What has become a question that I've heard different answers to is if someone, let's say, was in a traumatic situation with the head, they had an autopsy in the head, or they had some an injury, that there was a gunshot wound to the head, and you can't put them in the mikveh, you can't pour Tisha Kabin. But I've heard Chevra's asked the question, can you put the head in a plastic bag and pour water over the head with the plastic bag? The psak that I received was no. But that already, I know there are Chevras that have gotten a psak that is different. And whatever the psak of your Chevra and your poskim are, you could follow. But that's where you are pouring over the head. Where you're not pouring over the head at all, then there is no Tisha Kabin, as far as I understand it. Okay?
Rabbi Zohn, just
Yes.
to clarify one thing, you're making a bonnet out of a blue pad and covering the top of the head, but leaving the
That's
face
fine.
open.
The head is still being poured on. The back of the head is covered with a bonnet, but the face is uncovered. You're pouring over the head. That's perfectly okay.
Okay, excellent. We are.
I just want to run through it if it's okay. Just one more question that was asked, and then I don't mind going a little longer. Is that okay, Rabbi? If anyone, do we have any feeling about that?
I think what we can do is we can officially end at 9 o'clock, and if people want to stay for a bonus round, they can. How's that?
Okay, good, excellent. But before we do that, I would just like to address one question, and that is the best way to address a family who strongly desires to put something into the aron, such as a teddy bear, a photo, or a wedding ring, not on the finger. And those are two different things completely. If it's a wedding band, even if it's not on the finger, I would say absolutely not, because that was the takonis from Gamliel. People buried jewelry and wealth and all kinds of things with the person, and that is something that should not be done. That was part of the takonis from Gamliel, not just on the body, but to bury riches with the person. That should not be done. But the other stuff, that also shouldn't be done. But it's in the category of narishkeit. It's in the category of silliness. So I would not do it, but if someone asks, I would agree to do it, to put it at the foot of the aron. I would not try to lie things on top of the nifter, but if it's in the aron, a teddy bear or things of photos, if that's what they want, it's going to make them happy. It's what the person they think will be happy. It's fine. Just don't put a golf club in their arms. That is not a becoming thing to do. Okay.
Okay. Before we dismiss everybody, one very quick question that came on the Q&A is, the question is, is adding tefillos considered, quote, changing a minhag?
I would first of all ask what those tefillos are. And in other words, are they tefillos that come from a source that is handed down from a sower for generations, or is it something new that someone decided to add because they felt it was appropriate? That certainly, I would not do that. If it's an appropriate minhag that is done from certain Chevra's Kadisha, I know that from the time we started our own Chevra, there were certain things that we added, and we didn't say initially. I would ask that the Rabbanim in the community be consulted and maybe ask the posek that they feel most comfortable asking before they introduce it. But that, I believe, can be done, but with proper halachic guidance, knowing which tefillah it is and what the reasons were and what minhagim they were following, what the changes are. I wouldn't just do it because someone came from another Chevra Kadisha where they said it and now we're not saying it. We should therefore add it. I don't think that's appropriate.
Okay, excellent. Thank you all for coming. We're going to do a little bonus round. If you want to stay, either way, the recording is continuing and everyone is going to get a recording. I guess just to continue with the bonus round here, Rabbi Zohn, you want to address the other questions, or should I?
No, I have actually, except for one question that someone asked me, which is, I'd rather really go through the questions you have, if you have any. If not, I'll just bring up a question that came my way. But if you have any questions that were given to you during the chat, at the time, I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, so one real quick is that, do you know of a English translation of Zichron Meir?
I believe it existed at one time. I've never seen it. I was told that there was one. I don't know if it's still in print, but I think if you look for it on, in the Jewish bookstores, you'll see if they have it. It may say it's out of print. I don't know, but I believe at one time, I don't know if all of it or parts of it were translated. I'm not 100% positive.
Okay, no problem.
If anyone knows, by the way, feel free to, put it on the Q&A, whatever, and let us know. That would be fine. Go on.
Yeah, by all means, please. Okay. Removing gloves for in the middle of the process in order to wash before the tahara, in between the rechitza and the tahara. So this was one of the tikkunim, or whatever we call that, during COVID. So there are some covers that continue to keep the gloves on. Should they remove gloves, wash barehanded and dry and put gloves back on, or can they just keep the gloves on?
I would remove the gloves and wash and put it back on again. Wash up with soap afterwards. That is, I believe, what the takana was. When I first started teaching how to do a tahara, we taught to do tahara without gloves. Or Moshe Feinstein and many of the poskim held that gloves was a bizayah. Gloves was something that showed that you're not comfortable doing tahara. That was pre-AIDS, and we did thousands upon thousands of taharas, I hate to say it, on AIDS cases, not knowing they were AIDS cases, without gloves. Baruch Hashem, everyone was well. But that's not to say that we shouldn't take precautions. We now all wear gloves, and that's the appropriate and the absolutely required thing to do. But to wash, we should wash without gloves. That was the takana. If someone is particularly sensitive, someone has skin that's open, someone has chapped hands, whatever it might be, or a sore, of course they can leave the gloves on. But as you're asking me the question, I believe the most appropriate thing to do is to take off your gloves, wash your hands, and put it back on again. Put on a new pair of gloves. There's no shortage of PPE right now, and so it's fine.
Okay. Somebody who apparently installs backsplashes and the like offered the leftover ceramic tile to be used as sherbloch.
Once again, come again. What was that?
Apparently, the ceramic tile that you would use as a backsplash, like on a countertop.
Right. Was being used as sherbloch. Is that
the question is, should it be used not appropriate?
Now, I don't know. I don't know if it's cheres. It is what it is. It's cheres. It probably is very sharp, and for that reason, it may not be such a good thing to use, because I don't know what kind of tile it is. Some tile might be very sharp, some might not be, some might be as sharp. What we use, which is a flower pot, is not sharp. But one of the reasons I switched years ago to flower pots from what we used to use, which was broken plates of china that was made of cheres, okay, it was very sharp. It was dangerous to injure yourself and to injure the person. And it was hard, especially you're looking for a size that was fit. It was just much easier. But if it's not sharp, it probably is cheres. It's all the same color. If it has different colors, it's a tile that is blue, yellow, and green. Even if it's blue, white, red, white, and blue, it's patriotic. I wouldn't use it. It's inappropriate to put it on a person's face to have it's garish. I don't think it's appropriate. But if it's a white tile, it's a single color, whatever, it can be used. I don't think there's a terrible problem with it. I still think it's easier, more appropriate to use a broken pot just because it's just a better thing to do. Yeah.
Okay, and you'll pardon me for asking this, a mixed company, but nail polish, regular nail polish, and gel polish.
Okay, it's an important question. Regular nail polish should be removed. Any nail polish that could be removed fairly easily should be removed. With the men, I think that covers all the nail polish that we see, at least as of now. But for the women, if it's gel and it really is impossible to remove, even if you're going to spend a half hour, and if you do, it'll leave a nail that's mutilated. The psak of the poskim in the last year or two has been to just leave it as it is. Okay, we just don't touch it, we leave it.
Okay. Somebody said that in our Chevra, sometimes we walk the water down, sometimes we throw the water, depending on who's the Rosh. Is that a problem?
Yes, that is a problem. That is where Chevra's Kadisha should have a set minhag. Duke it out outside the Tahara room with Rabbanim, whoever it might be that you feel would make the decision, and you must reach a decision. Every person in your community should have the same Tahara. That doesn't mean, by the way, that if you have a situation where it might not be possible to do one, but it's only possible to do the other for whatever reason, because if you shoot the water, it's somehow going to possibly lose blood. If you walk it slowly, it might not, or whatever that might be. If you stand the body up, you might open something that's in the leg, that's an incision. But if you walk the water down or shoot the water down, there won't be a problem. That's fine. But other than that, there needs to be a clear minhag of the Chevra as to how you do a tahara. That's an eager part of the process, and it should be the same throughout.
Okay, so along those lines of, sometimes you have to do what you can. There was a question of if the skin on the back is sensitive and by moving the nifter onto boards, you're afraid of damaging the skin. Can you do the tahara line, just having the nifter line directly on the table?
I would prefer, honestly, that you place a pad, a sheet, even a piece of sheet underneath that holds it in place, even if you have to tie the sheet over the stomach or something so that it holds all the skin in place. The water will go through and then remove it, but put it on boards if at all possible. Doing a tahara flat on the table is not one of the ways in which it was accepted. And so I would try not to do that. I would try to put it on boards in that type of situation. If the skin is so bad that it's not going to be possible and you are going to further injure the person by putting it on boards, I would not do a tahara. If the minhag is to do a tahara on boards and there are no boards, I probably would not do it at all. But I think there's always a possibility of putting it on a sheet and raising the person on the boards that way. I think that is always, I think that's preferable.
Okay, excellent. Is it appropriate to say personal tefillos at the end of the tahara while standing next to the nifteres after asking mechila?
The answer is no. It is not appropriate. Many poskim have addressed this, and the person, the nifter or the nifteres at this time has so much to ask for and is so concerned with their own world, even though we ask them to be Melech Yosef for their family, in many times, even that, there are people say it should only be done by someone who's a tzaddik, but not for everyone, but there, at least it's their family. Part of their tsar is that they themselves are lost, and their family worries about their own family. So there you could ask to be Melech Yosef, that's the minhag. But for us to ask them and burden them with our own tefillos as a repayment, or because we feel that they're going, why not ask them? It's a good opportunity to get before the Kisei HaKavod. The answer is no. On the other hand, every time we do a mitzvah, particularly when we do a mitzvah like this, a chesed, and we have tremendous achusim, there is nothing wrong right away, as soon as you finish the tahara, to step to the side to go into the next room, not in front of the mace, or when the mace is removed, to say tehillim, or to have kavanas then, and ask the Ribono Shel Olam that in the zechus of this mitzvah, you ask for shleima for someone, or that this tefillah be mekubal, whatever it might be. That is perfectly appropriate, and it's a tremendous achus, and that is worthwhile doing. But not to ask the niftaris or the niftar to burden them with that is not appropriate. To ask mechila, on the other hand, is certainly part of the Minhag Yisrael, to ask them to forgive you for what you did or what you didn't do that may have been appropriate or inappropriate, whatever it may be. That is fine, but not to ask them to daven for you, or to daven for someone who needs something.
Okay, beautiful. If the Chevra has a minhag, we have 3 more minutes here. If the Chevra has a minhag to comb hair, so how important is that, especially if the hair is falling out?
The answer is it's not only unimportant if the hair is falling out, it should not be done if the hair is falling out. If the hair is coming out, you should stop immediately and just gather the hair together and put it in the bonnet. If it's a woman, or for the man, you'd cover the head. We do not do that. As far as saving a hair, there are some chevras that are very makbid, very concerned not to lose one hair. And if that's the minhag of the chevra, I wouldn't say don't do it. But there's no, from the poskim I spoke to, losing 1 or 2 hairs is not an issue. But certainly if it's a clump of hair, or you find hair on some tape, or whatever it might be, you should save it. If it's easily saved, it should be saved. But if you have to chase it down the table and went down the drain to go looking for a hair, we don't do that. It's not necessary to do. But there are chevras that are very makbid. I'm not going to tell them to stop being makbid. They certainly try to be careful with it. But Migra did most chevras, from what I've spoken to poskim about it, 1 or 2 hairs is not an issue. But more than that, if it's a clump, you should certainly save it.
Okay, and then finally, there was a question about younger women versus older women. Apparently, there are a lot of younger women who joined during COVID, maybe because of the inability to get people. Is there a preference of older women? I assume they mean postmenopause, versus younger women.
Again, there are those Chevra Kadisha who are very makbid to do it, and many of them over the years have changed simply because it wasn't feasible for them to continue. There's an Indian, but most, if the minhag in your Chevra Kadisha has been not to have younger women, and now you can't, again, discuss it with the poskim that you ask these shilas to, and follow what they tell you. There is definitely an important concept that it should be older women. And even if there are younger women, when they should go, when they shouldn't go, those minhagim should be followed. But you have to also be practical and realize that you have to have a Chevra Kadisha. So there are those poskim. I said, Ramosha was matir women who are pregnant to go to tahara. Obviously, these women are not post-menopause. Okay, so whatever it is, women. Most Chevra Kadisha today do allow women who are still of childbearing age to go to tahara.
Okay, excellent. Thank you all. We do have a lot of questions here that we didn't get to. We'll hopefully get to them either in a future newsletter or a future webinar. And feel free to email us at chevra@nasc.org. You can email Rabbi Zohn directly at rabbizohn@nasc.org. And we welcome your questions. We welcome the interaction, and we look forward to the next webinar.
I'll just say, please make sure that your Chevra Kadisha, all of your members, get our newsletters and are aware of these webinars, so that you don't have to explain to them what you heard, but all of you can hear it together. Okay, Yasher Koach for joining us, and maybe we zoche to Bila Movis Lanetzach. At Bez Hashem, very shortly we'll be zoche. We're coming to the Zman Gula Seinu. We should be zoche to the Gula Shlema B'meira.
Amen.